The biggest movement happened overnight. Paul George leaving the LA Clippers to sign a 4-year, $212 million deal with the Philadelphia 76ers. Does this just feel like a perfect fit from that standpoint? Let's go to Philly first. Does this feel like the perfect fit for a 76ers team that is trying to chase the Boston Celtics, trying to get over the hump of getting out of the second round? They haven't gotten out of the second round since 2001 with Allen Iverson and that group. This just feels like, stylistically, as Paul George is either their second or third best player with Maxey and Joel Embiid. Like, how do you see the fit?
No, I love it. It's funny. My apologies to the host here because I was late to the show today, right, Vinny? And the reason was I was trying to put a few thoughts and words together on this deal. We kind of knew it was coming last night. Admittedly, I probably should have written this column preemptively. You know what I mean? But I just got done writing my thoughts on Paul George. And to your question, I do like it a lot. I did highlight Daryl Morey in my column because after this year where he and James Harden had this debacle between them, the optics were bad for both sides. Daryl found himself, he's pretty quiet at the February trade deadline in terms of the assets they got in the Harden deal. With the Clippers, kind of keeps the powder dry at that point, which surprised some people. And then the whole entire time, there was some chatter that he had his eyes on somebody in particular. Now, to be clear, I do not have total clarity on if Paul George was that guy the entire time. But I do find it interesting because he waited, hits the summertime. And you talk about high stakes, Vinny. Like, Daryl found himself in an all or nothing game, in my opinion. Like, the plan B, if they did not get Paul George, like, I don't know what it was. I mean, I'd heard a little chatter about Klay Thompson, somebody like that, but that's not the type of guy who is going to make Joel Embiid happy and I think, continue this Embiid era in Philly. And I honestly think, not to be hyperbolic, but man, if they don't get Paul George, we saw they went 11-20 without Joel mid-season when we saw that as great as Tyrese Maxey is as a young talent, he needs help, can't carry a team by himself. That's a long-winded way of saying, yeah, I think Paul is a great fit. Certainly you can kind of raise, kind of eyebrows and question marks around the idea that when he's 38 years old, they're going to be paying him a ton of money. That's what the Clippers didn't want to do. But the other kind of mafioso part of this to me is for Daryl to say goodbye to James Harden, who pushed his way out, and then fill the vacancy by ruining the Clippers' plan to keep those three guys together is pretty wild. So, it's a pretty crazy finish here.
It's Machiavellian in a way. And I've heard, and I'm sure you've heard too, that Daryl has been lusting after Paul George since about midseason.
Sure.
And that the Clippers knew that Philly was going to be coming for Paul George in the summer if, things hadn't been, consummated, right?
Right.
This is what part of this makes me feel a little squeamish. And maybe squeamish isn't the word, but, a whole concept of loyalty and should the Clippers have done the trade to get Paul George there because they gave up Shea and all the picks and everything else. And this is a failure and all that. Like, we can touch on that. But I tend to believe when Kawhi Leonard signed his extension, I want to see if you rock with me on this one. Do you tend to believe, Sam, that the Clippers came to all three of those guys and said, this is how much money we have for the three of you, because we cannot get to the second luxury tax apron, which eliminates every single mechanism that we can use to make our team better. No signing trades, no aggregating salaries. You can't even really sign guys off of the scrap heap in the March buyout period.
Right.
Do you tend to believe that the Clippers came to them and said, this is how much money we have. You guys are going to have to split this up amongst yourselves, and this is how much we're going to offer you. And Paul was the guy to be like, I'm not with this plan.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And what's weird is you kind of, I get that with negotiations, there's always a timing component, meaning that you got to wait till the 11th hour to see who blinks. But it kind of feels like, if this is really how this is going to end with Paul and the Clippers, maybe one of the sides should have just said, no, trust me, we are not changing our stance. You know what I mean? Because that's really all that happened. They never made progress. The gap was still really big. And the underlying kind of belief system on both sides just never changed. Paul, and it's his right, certainly, basically said, I want the full boat. I want the 4-year max. And the whole league knew that because his camp was going around talking to all kinds of teams, basically every contender, every big city market, trying to see, what it might look like. And all across the board, the message was 4 years, full money. Like that's the beginning of the conversation. From there, it's, can you handle whatever a sign and trade might look like to give stuff back to the Clippers? None of those scenarios played out. The Clippers, in turn, and you already kind of highlighted this, they just, the way it was put to me by someone with the team was like, now they get to, it's funny because you lose Paul George, that is a negative, but now they get to function like a regular team again, like from a roster construction standpoint. Because, and even us in the media, Vinny, this, the second apron reality is still relatively new. And I don't think, I guess speaking just for myself, like we do a good enough job just yet of helping the fans understand like what the hell we're talking about here, because it is just like, it's absolute, hell for front offices to be in the second apron. You might as well just clock out and go home and see how the team plays on the court, because you lose damn near every tool available to make the team better. And that's where the Clippers were stuck. Like, yes, we want this superstar trio, but no, we don't want to be handcuffed in that way. And Paul obviously had other things in mind. I mean, I don't know how you feel as a side thing, seeing James Harden take a 2-year deal at, well below his max number is something I didn't necessarily expect, considering, again, the way he left Philly demanding the kind of full boat contract that Paul ultimately got. So I think the Clippers probably have mixed emotions today. They had a lot of nice things to say about Paul on the way out, but, they still have a decent team too.
Yeah, I think James, and this kind of dovetails into Klay Thompson, where you wind up taking less elsewhere because of the equity that you had with your current team or the current employer being Daryl Morey for Harden, where you have all this equity in with this guy and you're expecting to cash in on that equity. Whereas if you go somewhere else, you'll take less because they're giving you what they have. Like Golden State probably, I'm sure we can all agree, Golden State is probably offering Klay Thompson more than the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is $12.8 million. No doubt. But it's about how you feel. It's about how the money makes you feel. And for Paul George, the money made him feel something with the 76ers that the money wasn't going to make him feel with the LA Clippers. Being home wasn't going to matter. Playing with, playing in front of family and friends, playing with, Kawhi Leonard, trying to get this thing turned around as they open that new building in October of this coming year. That didn't make him feel anything. And now he's going to this pressure cooker in Philadelphia, where basketball-wise, I think he fits, right?
Yep.
I think from the standpoint of being the wing that can, okay, now you're guarding Jason Tatum. Now you're guarding Jaylen Brown. You know what I mean? And then they have to guard you. Like now you can see clearly everybody's chasing Boston, or at least the ideology of Boston. And that's where Paul is coming in at. From the Clippers standpoint, you're right. They can now operate like a much more cleaner and efficient and creative team. It doesn't make them better, but I didn't think that the operation was going to work anyway. And Sam, at some point, and I'm going to close it out here, at some point, we're going to have a conversation about how bad this CBA is for the players. It looks really good because you look at the numbers. Tyrese Maxey signing for $200 million. Paul George going to a new team signing for $200 million cleanly into cap space. But the things you don't see, I feel like, is the way that the CBA is screwed the players, or the players screwed themselves, because you're losing continuity. You're losing all these mechanisms to keep your team together. The money is still out there, but it just looks and feels different.
No, that's fair. I mean, these are not ideal examples, but the first two that come to mind, and they're two kind of old heads. Chris Paul getting waived, and he's in a good spot signing in San Antonio. I know we're going to make the rounds and talk about free agency, but that is, to a degree, that's a CBA move. The Warriors could have had other options, but just couldn't, stare down that first or second apron. That move happens. Russell Westbrook, opts in. Now this is a little more unique because the Clippers, I think, are just ready to be out of the Russ business. But the idea that he opts into a $4 million deal and they're still thinking about luxury tax is something to consider. So I agree. It's hard to wrap your head around because the numbers are so massive. So in a vacuum, that is great for the players. But I think your point about continuity is well taken.
Yeah, and for Philly, they're not going anywhere if Joel Embiid doesn't stay healthy. Like, they can do all this other stuff, and Tyrese Maxey is a revelation and a great player and plays with so much joy and happiness. And I'm really happy for him, especially because he delayed signing, this contract, this rookie extension, so that Philly could have the cap space to bring in another guy and all that type of stuff. But it don't matter what Paul George or Maxey does if Joel Embiid ain't healthy. Paul George can be your third best player. He can be your first best player. If he's your second best player, it's a little tricky. Now we're going to the Clippers.